what remained is the creme la creme. I'm very glad to start. Oh, Emil Brix is here. Wonderful.
Yes, hello. As promised, I'm
wonderful.
here on time.
Yes.
Good afternoon.
Yes, it was new to me, and I'm very glad that you joined the club. Emil, would you like to start then? And then
yes,
we start with you. Then comes András, and then Isotta, and we finish with Sean. And I skip my videos now. Okay. So my pleasure to introduce you, His Excellency Ambassador Emil Brix, who is also the director of the Vienna-based Diplomatische Akademie, and a member of our advisory board. And for a long time, we are cooperating quite closely. And very, very glad to see you, Emil. So please give us some good news. We heard a lot of not so very, very cheerful remarks and assessments. So the floor is yours. How to go forward? The floor is yours.
Parents, I will start with saying that I'm an Austrian, and the Austrian have always a consensus before they know what the conflict has been. So we are very much optimistic. No, the situation as I see it was to be expected in general. Because if you do not have one hegemon anymore, the hegemon is declining, and the power relations are more dynamic than they used to be since the end of the Iron Curtain. For the first time, it's a real change in power dynamics which we have. And we do not know what the end game of this dynamic will be. I think what we can be sure is it will get back to a stable system, some sort of balance of power, but we do not know how much time it will take. We do not know who will be, after all, then a major power or a less major power. And that concerns mainly the European Union. And we do not know what the rules will be of this order. So, and that's why I'm sorry, Ferenc, but I cannot be really optimistic about these things. What I see is here that at least we know what is no longer relevant. What's no longer relevant is certainly the idea that we have a rules-based order. It's no longer relevant. I'm sorry to say whatever Mr. Guterres is planning or saying, he has the problem that the UN is in the major conflicts irrelevant. For obvious reasons, that's the Security Council situation, but in general, the lack of possibility to enforce whatever the United Nations system is saying. We saw it even in the tremendous situation of the pandemic, but we certainly see it also now in the catastrophe that's happening in the Middle East at this very moment. So we don't have a stable institutional order which is rules-based, and we might expect that, as I see it, the future hegemon, who is most certainly China, has an interest in a rules-based order. And when you look at how the Chinese are patient in many of the things where they could, because simply of their possibilities, be much more active and much more demanding, I think this is because the strategy they follow is, and that's a promising thing, the strategy is time is on our side. It's possible to wait until the United States know that they have to be less hegemonic in what they do. And finally, time will also come where we do not have a real competitor in the Russian Federation. So I see the positive thing in the breaking the rules is that there is one who is possibly the next hegemon who is interested to re-establish a rules-based order. But this will look differently because, as we know, we did not expect that such an organization like Brix will really become important. But now it is important. in spite of all the constraints and all the inner dilemmas of this organization, because some of them are former colonial powers, some of them have an imperialistic idea, some of them, they are all very different in the economic layout and so on. And still, they seem to have one common idea which helps them to break the rules. That's they feel that they are already bigger, more important, have more power than the G7. When you look into the trade, for instance, or when you look into the GDP situation, or when you look into the population situation, that is certainly true. Does that mean that I expect that the framework of global governance in the future will be created by the Brix countries? I don't think so. But in the transformative period we are in at the moment, they play a very important role. What does this mean for those who are not members of the BRICS? As you know, BRICS are now 10 countries already, not only the 5 original ones or 4 original ones. It means that somehow the scramble for working with individual members of BRICS will increase. It does already. My own country, Austria Foreign Policy, we send out, as all the European Union countries do, the Foreign Service does, send out emissaries to BRICS countries to tell them how we feel that the Global South needs our support much more, and that the rules have to be fairer for them, and so on and so on. So the European Union countries, one by one, are trying to tell the BRICS countries the story that we are on your side. And if we continue in this, we can possibly create a stable world order, which is again based on a rule-based situation. But as I said at the very beginning, the problem is that the power shifts are dramatic, and it is not so clear whether there will be outbreaks of things like the Americans bombing the nuclear sites in Iran again and again. That has nothing to do, not much to do actually, with the personality of Mr. Trump, but it is certainly increased by the personality of Mr. Trump. It has to do with the hegemonic situation of the US, which I think the administration understands, the present administration understands perfectly all right. They understand that they are in a situation where their hegemonic position is not sustainable, but they feel that they have to do something which we call sort of making your own country great again and defending it against the new geopolitical situation. That's what the Americans do, and I think whoever comes after Mr. Trump, whether it's Republican or Democratic, will also do this, which means that the global alliances that we are used to are gone. The transatlantic partnership, as we are used to, is gone. And the idea that there is a democratic coalition is no longer as relevant as, for instance, Mr. Biden thought of when he organized meetings of global meetings of democratic countries. This is also gone. So it's much more a world where the power relations decide on alliances. Sometimes not very stable alliances, sometimes more stable. In the present conflict zones, I think it is still very clear that they are quite stable. I think in the Russian war in Ukraine, there's not much change in the who is doing what, and the Americans made this major shift towards the Russian position. And this will not change. They will stay there. Unfortunately, this will not be a good news for Ukraine. In the case of the Middle East, the major change that main Arabic countries are supporting actually the US position and indirectly the Israel position will also not change. It is there. It's not good news for Iran that after losing proxies in Lebanon and in Palestine, they have little Arab support in spite of the last few days. We see from the response of Saudi Arabia and others that is one cannot expect something like an Arabic coalition of the willing or something like that. So it will stay like that. We stay very, very unstable. And the open situation that I see is, and I didn't talk about it so much, is what will be in this breaking the rules, what will be the best route for the European Union. The European Union is still on the road towards human rights, but at the same time towards competition and defending itself. Will there be a possibility to bring these objectives together? I don't see at the moment good proposals for this. The competitiveness idea and the idea that we are defending human rights and that we are defending a rules-based order more than any other part of the world is not very helpful in providing a global role for the European Union at this very moment. Maybe when the situation gets more stable, Europe is, if it sticks to this norm setting and to this rules-based order and to the human rights support, maybe this is a special role for Europe. At the moment, it is a disadvantage for the European Union. And the member countries, most member countries know this. Some of them speak out along these lines very clearly, like Mr. Orban in Hungary. He understands the situation, and that's why he pushes against the European Union and creates all these problems for our integration project. And others are simply more quiet on this, but national elections in the European countries tell us that this is unfortunately a true story, that the European Union, for the time being, has to concentrate not on this sort of liberal values it was founded on, and which also the US supported for such a long time, but it has to speak with the as the last High Commissioner already said, it has to come from the language, from the power of language to the language of power, and the language of power means invest in defense. Be clear that we want to be the most competitive part in this new global order, and try to be very strict on things like migration and defending the outside borders of the European Union. That would be my evaluation of breaking the rules. So China doesn't need to break the rules in the given situation. America has already done the breaking of the rules, and it will continue. And Europe is about to break the rules, but they are not all convinced that it is the best way forward. So there is still discussion as usual before the European Union takes decisions. I'm sorry, there is no such a positive report from my side, but that's how I see the geopolitical situation.
Yes, but I hope, can you hear me? Yes, that you are staying with us, and I will have some general questions, or we'll ask all of you to give some suggestions where to go. This is kind of an assembly here, winter school and summer school. We should kind of formulate some policy suggestions for our beloved European community. So now, thank you very much. I would like to pass the word to our colleague from Andrásy University, who is an expert of political science and international studies, András Hettyey. András, please continue the train of thought of Professor Brix.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. My name is András Hettyey. I'm from the András University, which is a small German-speaking university in Budapest. Thank you very much for the invitation. This is my first time here, so I'm very glad that I could join the Institute of Advanced Studies. I have 3 short remarks, and I hope this will not take up more than 10 minutes, and they kind of align with what already has been said. I would start off with the observation that there is certainly a decline of rules and respect for rules in the international system. However, this decline is not uniform spatially. There is a variation. And I would argue that maybe the continent which still respects rules the most extensively is Europe, or the European Union, or the West, if you like. We see that there is a variation in the respect for rules, and I think rules are highly important. I think they are maybe even more important than power in explaining where the world is going and where it's not going. And I see, to be positive, I see here a competitive advantage for the European Union, and maybe only for the European Union, if I might be this colonialist, maybe alongside with the Latin American countries. I certainly see much less rules respecting in areas like post-Soviet states, in Africa, or in Southeast Asia. So I think this is something which has become very, very valuable, respecting the rules, and there is a premium on countries that do respect the rules. If I look at Russia, I think it's obvious that we cannot speak of Russia as being a country which respects rules very well. The well-known expert Angela Stant, who has written many books on US-Russian relations, has my favorite saying in this regard. She said, Russians are lousy joiners. Whenever they join international institutions or have joined international institutions, they were very bad at respecting the rules. Be it the Council of Europe, be it OSCE, be it G7, G8, etc. They are lousy joiners, and they are not very apt at respecting rules. So they fall out of the picture. United States of America, I think we can all agree that their level of respecting the rules has been in decline over the last past couple of months. They have become very volatile and unpredictable, and the usefulness of rules is exactly that they bring predictability into the system. Expectations can converge around an outcome if you have rules. You probably know what the other countries will do. And this convergence of expectations has been certainly decreasing because of the United States of America. And on China, I'm not so sure. I'm certainly not a China expert, but if I look at the South China Sea, things which are going on there, or even domestically the situation, I'm quite skeptical in how far China is interested in respecting the global rules. So I think here there is a niche for the European Union, and this is something which is a good news. My second point would be less of a good news, and this is the assumption that countries which respect the rules domestically, respect the rule of law, tend to respect the rules internationally, and vice versa. Countries which do not respect the rule of law, let's say inside the European Union, tend to be less respecting of rules also internationally. And I'm obviously thinking about my beloved country here, which I think domestically one can argue back and forth, but I would certainly stick to the point that there are some significant shortcomings as far as respecting the rules of democracy are concerned in Hungary. And I think not only a correlation but also a causation. I think that this is partly the reason why the same government is not really good at respecting rules also internationally, why we are kind of a not so constructive player. I would like to point to evidence, Article 7 procedure, for example, the withholding of funds. I have just checked, we have the 5th highest number of infringement cases in the European Union. So I think it's fair to say that Hungary is not among the best pupils as far as respecting the rules are concerned domestically, but also this leads to a situation where you see the same internationally. So my second point would be the more populist governments we are going to have in Europe, the more problematic rules respecting will become in the European Union. This is, I think, a very plain and simple observation. Every additional populist government will make things harder in the European Union, and vice versa. every non-populist government which will be elected in Czechia, probably not, etc., going down the road, will make it easier for the European Union to stick to these rules, to cooperate better. So the more populist, the less rules, and the weaker Europe and European Union will become. So I think it's high time to discuss things like qualified majority voting for common foreign security policy. Also a capital markets union is, I think, would be highly relevant. We certainly have a situation, to close my second point, where we need more Europe, not less. We need more rules, not less rules. And the stakes are, my third point, the stakes are high. And this is why there is a premium on rules respecting countries, which I don't really see Hungary being one of them. So my third and last point would be, I think this is also a platitude, stakes are higher in the world than before. But fortunately, and let me close with this last point, stakes are somewhat lower in Europe. We still don't have, I think, the possibility of a war between European countries and or NATO countries, whereas a weakening of regional and global powers have led to certainly more wars, just as Mr. Brix has said. If you think of Israel, one can argue that the leverage of the US over Israel has decreased significantly. This is why they are so bold. But if I think of Azerbaijan, certainly it has something to do with Azerbaijan's bold handling of the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh had, I think, something to do with the weakening of Russia over the last couple of years. So the weaker these hegemons become, the stakes will get higher. And this is something which is not the case in Europe, at least for the foreseeable future. This is why, for example, NATO enlargement with Finland and Sweden has been so important. I think this is one good example for two countries which generally respect the rules to join an organization which is founded on rules, democratic rules. I think this is a huge success which we maybe don't talk enough about. So for Europe, I think here, the stakes are high thesis. The response is we need to rearm, we need to deter Russia. Russia will not go away, even if Putin, if something happens to Putin, barring a major change in Russian domestic politics, Russia will stay here for the rest of our time. I think for my generation, for the people of my generation, diplomats, politicians, the big issue here in our region, the big challenge, the big problem, to be more precise, will be Russia in 2030, 50, and 70, if there's not a significant change. These are my 3 points, and I think I'll leave the rest to the others. Thank you very much.
Thank you. To Isotta, Ricci, Bitti, who's a co-founder of APROPOS, a politically neutral think tank working to improve, I was very glad to read, the way we design political communication and collaboration spaces. Can you hear? Okay, I read it again. So Isotta is a co-founder of APROPOS, a politically neutral think tank working to improve political communication and collaboration spaces. So Isotta, you are in the best place too.
Thank you. I'm
space to improve
space
collaboration.
to improve. Let's see. Is this working? Yes. So thank you for everyone who's still in the room. It's very hot. We'll try to make it interesting as best as we can. So thank you for the introduction. For me, it's a bit weird to be on a panel. Usually I'm behind the scenes, and I really come to this discussion not as a geopolitical strategist, not as an academic, but as a practitioner of political dialogue and process design, working to build relationships across different parties in Europe. So together with my team at APROPOS, which stands for Advancing Process in Politics, for the past 10 years we've been working with politicians, elected politicians in 35 countries in Europe, and our focus is really on designing the conditions to have better collaboration and better dialogue on very ambitious challenges that these politicians face. So as process designers, we operate in the field of the possible. We need to bridge the gap and ask what tools, what infrastructures, what strategy can we use to bridge the space between political intent and political action. So how can we apply this way of thinking to the democratic and geopolitical tensions that we face today that follow absolutely no rules? And how can we do this also with the class of politicians that govern us? So, and I'd like to start with one data point, which is this one. 56% of French citizens believe their society is so divided that they can no longer make progress together. So I ask, what happens to democracy when we no longer believe that we can act together? And this division is not just something that citizens experience, but also it's mirrored inside the institutions. So what we do, we're trying to bring politicians from spaces of conflict and debate to spaces of dialogues across differences, also withholding their different values. And we think that political polarization, which was something that we were observing in the US, is now at a very critical point in Europe too. And our inability to engage in discussions with the political other, it's really threatening the very fabric of democratic society. So just a quote from Arendt, because we cannot forget, who really grappled with more of these questions and even more eloquently or profoundly than I can ever do. But basically she was saying power belongs to a group and remains in existence only so long as the group keeps it together. And my interpretation of this is that politics is only possible among diverse individuals despite their differences when they come together and deliberate for progress. So when society are so polarized, as we're seeing in all of our European countries, that people no longer see the others as human beings or political actors that they want to discuss with, the space between them, which is where I think politics happens, is completely obliterated. So how do we rebuild that collective capacity in this crazy polarization that we see? And I want to offer our experience of APROPOS. As I said, we focus on engaging national politicians in cross-border political exchanges. We put them in rooms, we bring back complexity, we give them a name tag where they don't see which party they're from, and they work on the same challenges, which, by the way, they decide themselves. So the network and platform is completely bottom-up. And 10 years ago, they told us, like, you will never be able to do this work with politicians, they have no time. Well, now they come, and we need to leave them out. These people and this class, which I think cannot afford to antagonize entirely as a class, need a space to think and do more critical thinking. I heard a call for a more enlightened leadership. Well, this is a way to basically propose more critical thinking among them. And so we connect MPs across borders, ideologies, in numbers that usually only institutions can gather. So we have up to 70, 80 people in the room, policymakers to policymakers. The dialogues are informal, they're confidential, and they're essential, because basically they understand how to build better argument without giving up their own values. This is how I really think that we keep building trust through dialogue as a key democratic infrastructure that we normally don't think of, because dialogue has a little bit of a bad rep that I will talk about in a second. But with these ambitious challenges, and now after the first few days, I was thinking, like, with every atom in my body, why did I say yes to join a geopolitical panel? And I come with dialogue, people will say, what are you saying? You're completely out of your mind. But no, yes, we need to take the time, we need to invest in intentional dialogue for these people to come together and work better in the institutions. So even when things feel very, very urgent. And I just want to show you a few faces of the steering committee that we reunited this year. These people rotate, but we really have a lot of different parties that have been working on this very various challenges. And here you will see people from far-right parties, from socialist parties, from minority parties all over Europe, and it works. We can say we've seen it is not just theory. So we have multiple first-hand testimonials that the members, especially, for example, a lot of opposition members from Hungary and Poland, they said this is the first time that we actually have access to spaces where we can do more critical thinking. So we think that dialogue really supports politicians in contrasting backsliding democracy. They generate lifelong relationships among political players. They also go on in having very high-level position. Kubilius was one of our members until very recently, but these people will be influencers, political influencers. So we influence the influencers, really. And we encourage political thinking that goes beyond the national bubbles, because it's not very often that somebody from the Five-Star Movement will be together with Fidesz in a room and actually have a space to debate away from journalists or other actors. So I know I'm asking a very big challenge for you to follow me in this journey about dialogue, but this is the provocation that I'm bringing to the table today. They told me we want diversity, so this is my attempt. Two truths and a lie about dialogue. Dialogue is naive. I think dialogue has a really bad reputation because many assume that dialogue means giving in. So we compromise. This is not intentional dialogue. Actually, the way we do dialogue, it means that it's going to be a very deeply transformative exercise that in a way it's terrifying because it doesn't mean we're going to win it. This is not a space where we enter to win a political argument, and imagine doing this with politicians that only know this type of default. So we need to bring them in a different structure, in a different space where they can go from debate to actually listen, as Judy was also saying before. And I think idealizing a version of dialogue that feels comfortable is a very human error, exactly because it's really terrifying. And as much as we know about geopolitics and different science and techniques, I think dialogue is not a soft skill, but something that we need to train the politicians of today even more. Sorry, coming to a close. So dialogue is really the strategic human infrastructure that we need to invest in, the foundation for the relationships and trust that hold up our ability to act together, and without which democracy cannot survive. I'll leave you with a question, the unseen security crisis, I call it. So in this reordering world that follows no rules, where we cannot predict what is happening next, what would it mean to design our infrastructures of politics and security to strengthen our ability to act together? Which doesn't mean it's going to be a consensus exercise, but that we actually can maintain a society where collaboration across divides is possible and doesn't turn violent. So thank you. Excellent.
Yes, and now comes Cleary. Can you hear us? Sean?
I can hear well. Can you hear me now?
Well, now we can hear you. So
Super.
Please.
And do I have a screen up?
Yes? Yes, yes. Breaking the rules, geopolitical rivalries, and the making of a new global order. The big...
I'm doing, if I may, Ferenc, I'm doing this for a very simple reason. I just want to show that a great deal of what has been said already, not only do I endorse, but I endorsed before anyone else had said it. So this is not following the crowd. It's, I think, a shared perspective that we probably all have of the nature of the challenge at this point in time. And if I may, just to pick up on Isotta's observation, Isotta, just for the record, I was one of the 12 who put together the National Peace Accord in South Africa. And after 78 hours of debates in 2004 between a range of 7 Israeli parties and 5 Palestinian fronts, including Hamas, we actually produced 10 points that in a referendum thereafter in both Palestinian and Israeli societies achieved in Israel 68% approval and in Palestine 72% approval. So I couldn't agree more with the importance of dialogue. But we've got a challenge at this particular point for a whole variety of reasons. And perhaps the first one is that if we want to be able to operate collectively in the context of a rules-based international order, to pick up on Emil's first point, we actually have to have a number of very basic things. Hettyey famously said that a global society needs to consist of a group of states conscious of common interests and common values, who conceive themselves to be bound by a common set of rules and relations to one another. And I think all of us would recognize we don't have that today. If we look at the problem on two levels, on the national level and on the international level, it's clear that government has a simple purpose in both areas. First of all, the purpose of our economies and polities on a national level is logically to advance the welfare of our societies. But with the level of fracture and polarization that we have in almost every society today, that clearly is not happening. Secondly, if we want to advance societal well-being at scale, we have to strengthen the institutions needed for international cooperation, to restore trust, to contain conflict, and to enable cooperation for the common good. And again, as Emil pointed out right at the beginning, the United Nations system, which is our primary mechanism for that particular purpose, is malfunctioning on almost every conceivable level. If you think about it, human security, equity, and sustainability, which you can think of as intergenerational equity, are the underlying principles of this. And whereas you might be able to find agreement in principle on this, none of it is in fact executed in practice. The problem, though, is that the world is going through one of those remarkable shifts that one sees at irregular intervals, which predisposes towards large-scale fragmentation at present. We have a shifting center of economic gravity from the Atlantic to the Pacific. We have a weakening of US capacity and interest in power projection. As a consequence of both, we have a significant disruption of the rules-based international order. In part as a result of that, but for other reasons as well, we have great geopolitical tensions and contestation of regional security environments right across the Muslim space between the Eastern Mediterranean and Central Asia, in the Russian sphere of influence, the so-called near abroad in particular, and in East China and South China seas. All of that is happening at a time when we are facing the largest technological revolution, a biodigital technological revolution, in fact, but the largest that we've experienced in human history. This is generating both domestically and across borders societal disruption, significant weakening of national governance, and because we are not managing the commons with any level of skill whatever, system-wide stresses due to the impacts of a growing, rapidly urbanizing human population on the Earth system as a whole. The long and the short of all of that is that we're on the verge of a symmetry break between the highly connected global economy, fracturing, 'tis true at the moment, but nonetheless still highly connected, a deeply fractured global society, and the complete inadequacy of our political instruments, particularly the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, and the WTO, to be able to close the gaps between this fractured society and integrated economy. Some of you will have seen me use Gramsci for this purpose before, so I apologize for it. But Gramsci famously, in 1930, from prison, wrote, "The crisis arises from the fact that the old is dying, the new cannot yet be born. And in the interregnum, many morbid symptoms occur." To swing back to Isotta just for a moment, I'd also point out that he'd said a year earlier, "I'm a pessimist by dint of reason, but an optimist by force of will." And that, of course, is our challenge at present, to bring about the emergence of an order that makes meaningful sense. But we're at a curious moment where three things are collating in an extremely uncomfortable way. We have divisive multipolarity as a result of the fracturing of the rules-based international order at a time when we have significant normative fracture at the same time. There's divergence on norms, divergence on what constitutes the substance of international law, and even jus cogens, peremptory rules of international law, is not agreed at this moment, as we'll see in a couple of instances at present. And then, as I say, all of this is occurring in the context of the largest technological revolution in human history, and all large-scale technological revolutions have caused huge social, economic, and political consequences. The Industrial Revolution between 1760 and 1860 gave us, in effect, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Napoleonic Wars, the transformation of the British political system, the revolutions of 1848 and the end of empires, as well as the shift in the economic center of gravity from Asia, where it had been for 2,000 years, to Western Europe. Emil spoke of the restoration of stability. Complex systems are very curious things. They eventually settle back after periods of significant disruption into a metastable state that allows one then once again to be able to set the rules. The problem is that history tends to suggest, and I'll only take European examples briefly, but history tends to suggest that our ability to craft new metastable conditions, premised, I think, throughout history, on, first of all, an equilibrium, or a balance of power, if you will, within an order that is perceived by all major actors to be broadly legitimate. Think of what happened after the Congress of Vienna in 1815 as a perfect example. That tends to happen in the aftermath of violent conflicts. So we had Augsburg in 1555, after the beginning of the religious wars. We had Westphalia in 1648. We had Vienna in 1815. We had Versailles in 1919. And we had Bretton Woods and San Francisco in 44 and 45 of the last century. How much drama we have to go through, how much disruption we have to suffer before we get to a new metastable state is, I think, the challenge of the moment. And all of this is occurring at times when a number of factors are very evident simultaneously. The decline of representative democracy, and the fractures that we can see at present in respect of the interaction between states. We have the rise of nationalist populism, many of you have referred to it. We have primitive mercantilism. We are going back to a period before Ricardo where comparative economic advantage is being thrown out the window through tariff policy under present circumstances, with a somewhat naive belief that this will enable industrial reshoring at scale. And then we have surging military spending in the context of a fracturing NATO, demands from the United States that all other NATO members should increase military spending to 5% of GDP. These are in circumstances where growth has been practically at 0 to 1% throughout most of the other states within the NATO framework. And where, as a consequence, any increases in military spending, however well justified in the context of Russian aggression, are going to occur at the cost of social investment within the countries themselves. It's not particularly surprising that even Ursula von der Leyen came up with a very simple observation about 10 days ago, that the West as we know it is dead. Mercantilism, as I've said, is on the order of the day, and NATO defense spending right across the world has been increasing for the last 2 years. It rose by 9.4% in 2024 to the highest global total ever recorded in the 10th year of consecutive increases. Russia is by definition less secure today, ironically, than it was before 2007, when Putin first stood up at the Munich Security Conference and argued that the existing world order was both immoral and unsustainable. And we have not yet found a means of creating indivisible security in order to be able to address European challenges on scale. Ironically, as several of you, and certainly Emil, will know, there were negotiations in 2008 and 2009 around a European Security Treaty that actually at its heart might provide a basis for addressing these particular challenges. Right now, there's still no appetite for it. If you take the Middle East, we have this horrendous situation where even a former premier, certainly no liberal at the time, has now described the current government of Mr. Netanyahu as a criminal gang and has argued that Israel is committing war crimes in the context of what is currently being undertaken. The United States, as a result of the fact that Mr. Trump is clearly aligned in interest, if not in principle, with Mr. Netanyahu, has just undertaken Midnight Hammer. The consequences you can see there. There are 7 major holes in the area around Masdar, around Fordo. We do not know at this stage of the game what the extent of the damage is. What we do know is that very significant amounts of 60% highly enriched uranium were in fact removed from Fordo 2 days ahead of the strikes themselves. The problem is that this is exacerbating the tension. We had, at the same time as the large-scale strikes being undertaken by the IDF and then the United States deployment of the GBU-57, we had a circumstance where the PRC, the People's Republic of China, had already condemned what was being undertaken in this regard and described it as a violation of international law. The case, by the way, is extremely good. It is always a violation under both the Charter and under the Statute of the International Atomic Energy Act to strike military nuclear installations in the manner in which these were struck. But more importantly, perhaps, the organization of the Islamic Conference Foreign Ministers meeting, which was taking place at the same time, has universally condemned it. This has spun out. There are 17 African countries that have already issued statements of condemnation following this, not just those who are in the OIC, but a variety of non-Islamic states in that particular regard. We are fracturing the global south to an even greater degree than we had experienced prior to the event. Now, the challenges of all of this is that this is occurring at a time when we are neglecting any meaningful ability to be able to address the challenges of the commons. We find this in respect of climate, we find it in respect of the breaching of planetary boundaries, we find it in terms of increasing inequalities, we find it in terms of a gigantic deficit in respect of addressing the Sustainable Development Goals. The last figures released at the UNCTAD meeting were a 4 trillion annual financing gap at present in respect of achieving the SDG targets. And the World Bank has already indicated that there will be a significant decrease in global growth target figures in respect of 2025, down to 2.3%, with no more than 2.5% projected across the whole of the 2020s, which is the slowest pace of growth in any decade since the 1960s. This obviously is exacerbating tensions between the advanced economies and the global south, strengthening the hand of those who would fundamentally transform the order into a different state, and weakening the position of Western powers and Western normative capabilities in this regard. It's bringing about a significant reduction in global aid, and China is stepping into the gap. In response to Mr. Trump's imposition of tariffs on a wide variety of African countries, up to 40% in some cases, China has just announced that it will expand its zero tariff treatment for 100% of all tariff lines to all 53 African countries with diplomatic relations with China. So the long and the short of this, and I'll stop there, but the long and the short of this is we are, with what we're doing at the moment, fracturing the order dramatically, and therefore predisposing to an extended period of uncertainty, the absence of agreement on basic rules, an inability to address systemic risks, and a complete failure to be able to respond effectively to the challenges of the commons. We can talk a little more in a moment about solutions, but the challenge, I don't think, can be underestimated in any fashion.
Well, thank you. Yes, I would like to open the floor, but maybe a short reflection from the panelists, and if you allow me a few remarks, a bit provocative, and I hope not too exaggerating. Obviously, every day we are getting closer to the understanding on larger and larger scales that what we call the capitalist world order, the liberal democracy, and all of the institutions belonging to it is over. And if this is true, and I think it is true, I, as a researcher, you have to mention here that there are people, analysts, sociologists, historians, who predicted it very clearly in the last 30, 40, 50 years. I don't give you a lecture now. But just remember Immanuel Wallerstein and the Dependencia School and the Club of Rome. We did not listen. We believe that it might happen that the global capitalist system is going to collapse, but we didn't. You know, this is my first question to all of you. How to change this human behavior and attitude towards catastrophe or deep crisis or collapse? Because in a way, everyone in this room, and multiply it with 10 or 100 of our colleagues and friends heard this. From me personally and from many others, and we simply didn't care. Just give you another small example. When 2004, 5, 6, it was more and more clear that the European Union is unable to create what it has promised with the Eastern enlargement. And the European institutions are not going to be extended in a democratic way. European society does not have an identity, and that it has severe consequences for democracies as such. People, I was ridiculed. My friends and colleagues, even in this room, were smiling at me, well, Ferry, and you know, this is democracy. I mean, it was just foreseeable that it is unsustainable. We are living in a fragmented world and try to believe that democracies are sustainable on a national level. Meanwhile, we had a global economy and, what Cleary very, very aptly, many times underscores, and a rapidly progressing technology in the hands of the military-industrial complex and oligarchs, exceedingly. Now it is somehow over, and even today, our friends from the imagined West, which I agree does not exist anymore, the way how it was imagined for like 70, 80 years, they don't want to hear that. So I'm sorry, I'm not defending at all any populist governments, not ours in Hungary. But the Hungary bashing, you know, it's just diverting attention from this very grave common problem. And all of the players, I cut myself short, okay? All of the global players, China, Russia, United States, Israel, and whoever, the Brix countries, are not going to change. They have a very fixed track now. The only player it potentially could be a global player is the European Union. And the European Union is unable for any deeper self-reflection. It has promises. We repeatedly talked about the European political community, which has a potential, and the Eastern enlargement now towards the Balkans and maybe Ukraine. But it's not plausible somehow, not believable, and that was mentioned by Isotta. There's no trust without trust. in each other without open speech, without dialogues, we can't go anywhere. So, it's my question to all of you, first the panelists, how to come out from this, what to do, что делать. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov was already quoted, the first speaker, kindly started with a Lenin quotation yesterday, Mr. Simone. So, yes, so what is the practical, it can be even say theoretical way to get out from this deadlock? I have several quotations. If you have time, I will read it to you. But tomorrow there will be a NATO summit. The former Italian foreign minister started to organize a counter-NATO meeting. And the present one says that NATO is useless in its present form. So we don't agree upon everything. How to come out from this deadlock or this very dangerous situation, which is a vacuum, which is becoming more a vortex, a downward spiral. Isotta, would you start?
Wow, yes. By the way, I have the Gramsci quote above my bed for a few years already. Il vecchio sta morendo, il nuovo tarda a comparire. It's tough. I mean, with my organization, we decided to focus on a very specific type of stakeholders, which is politicians. And if you think about that, we upskill and do work in all of the different jobs that we do, but we don't do this for politics. We expect these people to be robots, to consume information, to issue recommendations, yet there is no space to think. And so I know it's a drop in the water because we reach 300 politicians national level per year, and there are 10,000 in Europe. But that's why if I find somebody that gives me 1 million, we can scale up, but we're still a small organization. But this needs to be done, and we see that it works also within the same national parliaments. So parties in the same parliaments also don't have a space to come together. They go to international conferences, and it's one statement after the other. So if anything, you come out of the big foreign committee meetings that you not only think the same, but you entrench your position even more in what you were thinking before, which is not the premise for actual change in such a space. So I'll bring something to, some water to my, as we say, I'll sing my gospel. We need a different political culture. So there are different ways to do this, and we need the tools for collaboration, especially now that we want to rebuild international cooperation. And for collaboration in a scale of 1 to 10 steps, 0 to 8 for meets dialogue, 9 and 10 you can act. So we can say if in 20 years we are still here saying the same things, or we actually want to take the time to think together how to
any
move forward.
practical proposals?
Well, what I do, I more than spending 24/7 with politicians trying to comfort them and saying, yeah, it's a therapy session basically for all of us. And imagine, like,
good.
Also,
good, very good. All right, András and Emil and Sean, and then the floor is open.
Thank you very much. My sentence would be: if you know the value of something, you will fight for it, and if you're not aware of the value of something, you will not, or you will fight less for it. And I think my task, and maybe the task of all our academics, as we are, many in the room, is to make sure that our students and our listeners are aware of the unprecedented growth in welfare, in well-being, in peace, which this world has seen over the last 80 years. This, what we have seen, this rule-based order in the West after 1945, in Eastern Europe since 1990, is unprecedented. The chances, the constellation for this to happen have been very low. It's absolutely not natural that an entity like the European Union would voluntarily give tons of money to its members just to bring up their level of income. So I think the challenge is, and the task is, to make everybody understand how precious this, what we have achieved, is. Obviously, there are problems, but I wouldn't think that the global capitalist system is necessarily collapsing. It has certainly produced great dividends. But if you're skeptical on this, my question is always, okay, if there are so many problems, what would have been the alternative? Okay? what other economic or political system would have produced better results. And I dare you to challenge me on this. I don't think there was an alternative since 1945 or 1990. But if you are not persuaded by this preciousness or a value of what we have achieved, you will not fight for it. You will be persuaded by politicians who say that most of the things have gone wrong since 1990, and we need a new European Union reduced, or we don't need NATO, or we need the Brix to integrate, etc., etc. And all this, my last sentence, might be, you might agree with this or not, but I think on a normative level, there is not much arguing for a situation where a country like Hungary, for example, would be better off. I'm very hard pressed to imagine a situation. I think Hungarian foreign policy, but also economically, we are at an optimum. Okay, the system which we live in cannot be much better than we have it now. So from there on follows that we as Hungarians all the more need to defend this.
Just for clarification, one sentence, András. I did not say that the global capitalist system as an economic system is collapsing in itself. It has to be seen together, and this is what we do I ask, interdisciplinary approach, with its political, whatever you call it, system, which is the system of fragmented nation state. It is collapsing. The democracy does not function. Donald Trump started the war. There was a lady here from New York who was actually close to the Trump ideology. We had a very, very good discussion in the evening, in the morning. And actually, she changed her opinion. She asked the question about America in war. Who legitimates the bombing of Iran? Was Donald Trump doing it as a leader of the Western world? No, he's not anymore the leader of the free democratic world because he's an autocrat. According to some people, he's a fascist or a proto-fascist. Very far from being the image of United States in the 60s, JFK, etc., even Clinton or Obama. So this is the problem, that the West, as it was in our imagination, does not exist anymore. There are Western countries, there are newcomers, like the wonderful ambassador of South Korea several times in this room the last half year expressed himself. South Korea would be very happy to join the imagined West and the European Union. And there are others, potentially, Japan or Australia or Canada. But as we knew it, the West does not exist anymore. And this is why the Italian foreign minister is very critical about NATO and says that bye-bye NATO, and we'll read this quotation. They are going to meet tomorrow. So this situation is much more severe than you describe. I mean, yes, the system produces fantastic, as this is shown clearly again, fantastic technological advances, but they are turned against us, against societies. There are calculations about it. There are oligarchs who keep completely in an anti-democratic way all this technological progress in their hands. So that is what I'm saying when I mean that the global capitalist system with the liberal democratic view or ideology, which was created or established after the Second World War, does not exist anymore. Just to clarification. Okay. Emil?
Yes. Yes, I was about to say, as you now explained, the global capitalist system is certainly not dead. It is well alive and kicking. The combination that it depends on democracy is no longer relevant. It works also without our idea of a liberal democracy. So the question we have to ask, not what will come after the capitalist system. It's likely that it will stay there for a long time. With whoever profits is a different question. But what happens to the liberal democracy if it's no longer seen as a provider of wealth and welfare in a capitalist system. More and more people, the population will say, okay, so we don't need this. The welfare can be provided in a capitalist system, obviously without liberal democracy. This is our issue that we should deal with, and possibly the rule of law. We in the West always thought rule of law means liberal democracy, but maybe we should also critically analyze this. Rule of law can be any rule of law, but we always think that it is a liberal idea of a rule of law. So this would be my point here, really. What should be discussed is, what is the connection really between the rule of law and liberal democracy?
I perfectly agree. Now, Sean?
Getting there. The terrifying thing about all of this is that we actually all agree on far too much. And as a consequence, the debate is comparatively constrained, ironically. But let me offer three quick observations. The first one is that it doesn't really matter what your theory of history is, so I'll just take two as archetypes of this, Toynbee's cycles of history and Hegel's dialectic. They encompass a very large range of theories of history. And the underlying proposition of each is that a thesis, a dominant way of doing things, generates reactions to it in a variety of different ways. And one of two things then happen. You either get a revolution or you get a synthesis. So either the thesis and the antithesis synthesize meaningfully. This is the Marxian application of the Hegelian dialectic, or you get a fundamental dislocation in the primary thesis. And that is the sort of thing you got largely in the 18th century when sovereignty of the people came to displace sovereignty of the sovereign. So the idea that anything that has worked for a long period of time continues endemically because historically it worked is completely ahistorical. That's not, we've never experienced anything like that. The entirety of human history is in fact large-scale disruption at intermittent intervals, sometimes occasioned by technological shifts, sometimes occasioned by religious conflict, sometimes occasioned by conquest or by the expansion of the scale of a particular political order outside of the parameters where control could effectively be exercised. But because something has worked doesn't mean it will continue to work for an unlimited period of time. Just one observation. Second observation, Danny Roderick, 25 years ago now, came up with a very simple proposition where he argued against the idea of what he called hyperglobalization at a time when the vast majority of the rest of us were simply talking about globalization. But he argued that the problem about integrating the global economy digitally in respect of integrated supply chains and financially was that this inevitably created competitive positioning based on comparative advantage between states, which automatically meant that welfare within certain states was in fact sacrificed in order to achieve aggregate benefits. So what Trump complains about in respect of the deindustrialization of the United States is, of course, a fact of life. We offshored enormous amounts of manufacturing and industrial capability to China, enormous amounts of service industries to India, because the cost competitiveness of those economies was highly significantly superior. This produced tremendous returns back to the owners of capital, and hence persons in financial services, persons who were part of a global economy. The overall aggregate performance of stock exchanges and the like benefited enormously. But obviously, the returns to labor, the returns to blue-collar workers, the returns to people who did not have the skills to be able to compete globally and to be able to shift from one particular line of work to another profession was obviously diminished in the process. And this is the fundamental structural reason why we have seen massive increases in aggregate inequality, because returns to capital have increased highly significantly, returns to labor have essentially stayed static. So these are the challenges that are bringing about the disruptions that we're experiencing at the present. Unfortunately, the application of tariffs, the application of protectionism, and the application of political populism, by definition, is not a solution to these particular challenges. So something is going to break as we go through this particular process. It's not going to be as it was. Look at the projections in respect of the advanced economies out over the next 5 years or over the next decade. Those growth rates will not sustain anything like the levels of welfare increases that we hope for, levels of additional military spending, or the ability to be able to close the gap in respect of the SDGs. The money's not going to be there. So we are where we are, and the challenge is going to be, can we in fact devise responses to this that are going to be fit for purpose in the present without commenting on how successful they were in the past. Obviously, economic growth between the late 1990s, if you exclude the crashes, the dot-com bust, the global financial crisis, if you exclude those periods, obviously the aggregate increase in global welfare was enormous. At least 2 billion people were taken out of extreme poverty over that particular period, mostly in China, by the way, but that's neither here nor there. We saw a significant reduction in the levels of extreme poverty across the global landscape, and globalization served a whole variety of particular purposes while having costs in other areas. Now, coming back to this point about China, and that's my last point, China, ironically, whereas it is not comfortable with the existing rules-based international order, has a very real interest in creating a new rules-based international order very similar to the one that's operated in the past, because China, as a consequence of its massive investment in education and skills training and the rate of urbanization occurring within the country itself, is inherently producing much more than it's capable of consuming. So China desperately needs to be able to benefit from World Trade Organization rules of free trade and export in order to be able to sell what it produces. China, as a consequence, has actually produced more documents around the rules-based international order in the last 5 years than any other state in the world. In fact, all other states in the world added together. It's produced a global development index. It's produced a global security index, a global development initiative, a global security initiative, a global civilization initiative, and a very extensive set of proposals for the reform and development of global governance, which it produced for the purpose of the Summit of the Future. The fascinating thing is we have refused to discuss these. And at a point, I'm speaking a little bit out of school now, but at a point at which I tried to encourage the Secretary General of the United Nations to get the President of the General Assembly to debate these Chinese documents ahead of the Summit of the Future, the word came back to me that the United States did not wish these documents to be debated because it would allow China primacy in respect of the debate leading up to the Summit of the Future. Now, we can't, by definition, learn if we don't listen. It doesn't mean we agree. It doesn't mean we should agree. It doesn't mean we have to agree. Europe, in my opinion, the European Union, has been the greatest experience in transnational quasi-federalism in human history. It's been gigantically successful. It's done extraordinary things. It has its weaknesses, as the Letty and Draghi reports make perfectly clear, but it's been a remarkable success in collaborative endeavor over an extended period. But we mustn't imagine, if I can borrow Cato Censorius's observation, we mustn't imagine we know everything. The wise man, as he famously said in about 100